In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to put together the best RTX 3080 gaming PC in 2022, featuring a 12th gen Core i7 CPU, a Z690 motherboard, and loads of awesome hardware. I'll be covering off all the component choices, the build process from step by step, and looking at performance just a little bit later. Let's do this. As you can see, our table is a literal mecca of PC hardware. With some of the best components out there, it can be difficult to know where to start. Should we look at the GPU first off? No, we should not. Or what about these cool QL RGB fans? Nope. So no on those too. Instead, we're going to begin by looking at the motherboard and CPU choice. For the CPU choice in this build, I've opted to go for the Intel Core i7-12700K. Now, the latest range of Intel CPUs bring them back with a bang and leave AMD out for dry when it comes to high-end processors. With plenty of Intel's latest performance and efficiency cores and incredibly high clock speeds, it caters for all the latest games nicely. Everything from Halo Infinite to COD Vanguard and older titles like Apex Legends and Fortnite 2. Fast single-threaded performance is crucial, especially if you're going to game on this build at 1080 or 1440p. We need to pair up one of the most powerful CPUs on the market with a motherboard that matches well. And my choice, MSI Z690 Force Wi-Fi, ticks every single box, and believe it or not, isn't going to break the bank as far as the budget goes either. There's a few key things you need to look out for when buying any motherboard. The first is plenty of VRM cooling and power delivery. This will let us overclock the CPU later. M.2 heatsinks to keep our Gen 4 storage nice and cool. We'll come onto that in a moment's time. We've got 4 RAM DIMM slots on this board which support DDR5 memory, and even a handy little LED display that will give us an error code and help us easily debug if we've got any problems. Perhaps the most crucial though is support for Wi-Fi if you haven't got any wired internet where your setup's located, and the latest USB-C standard too, giving plenty of throughput for fast USB devices. When it comes to installing the CPU into this motherboard, it's a bit different when it comes to the latest Intel generation. Similarly to last gen, you want to start by pulling up the retention arm on the socket, but the socket is going to open out from the bottom this time rather than from the top. What you're then going to do is grab your processor itself and locate the golden triangle in the corner. We'll be matching this up today with the bottom left triangle on our motherboard socket and dropping the processor in accordingly. Give it a very small wiggle to make sure it's seated correctly, and then use your own force to push the socket back down. The black plastic cover will pop off, and once it's done so, then you can finish things off by adding the arm into place. It's more delicate and the pins are definitely more prone to bending. We've learnt this one the hard way, so do be careful when it comes to the latest chips. What we're going to do next is we're going to install the RAM or the memory. Now for this build, I've picked up a kit of Corsair's Dominator Platinum RGB. Now, sad news, it isn't white. There are black and white kits available, so I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll link both the black and white options in the description at the affiliate links below, where you can also find latest pricing and availability for all the components that we talk about. Now to install the memory is pretty easy. Hover it over the DIMM slot, but don't install it yet, because you need to locate the notch on the DIMM itself. You can see ours is just here. This is going to match up with the notches on the motherboard, and we'll be using the 2nd and 4th RAM DIMM slots working outwards from the CPU. If in any doubt, consult your motherboard's manual, as this will give you an exact breakdown and highlight the slots in various colours. One huge bonus of this 32GB kit is that you can pick up another kit later on and just slot it. Oh, our M.2 heatsink has decided that today is not its day. And what you can do is you can add these into the spare slots for 64 gigs of memory a little bit later. I guess the M.2 heatsink falling off is actually a good sign, as it allows us to move on to the next component, our Gen 4 storage. For this build, I've gone for something different. This is a Seagate Firecuda 530 in disguise. It's Seagate's brand new Star Wars The Mandalorian edition. Now this isn't going to be for everybody, but if you've got any Disney fans out there, this makes a lot of sense. It's also got a design that fits better in the theme of our build, going for lighter whites and greys as opposed to all black everywhere. there. This drive has all the specs you come to know and love from the Seagate Firecuda 530, and there'll actually be a full review dropping over on the eBuy YouTube channel, which you can go and subscribe to in the cards section now. It doesn't really come at much of a price premium either over the full spec Seagate Firecuda 530, and with all the usual data recovery goodness and high speeds that you've come to know and love from Seagate's entrance to the SSD game, you won't be disappointed. Now this board on the M.2 slot actually has a cool little pull tab here that in theory makes the M.2 drive installation toolless. Although I have had issues with this before, especially on drives with built-in heat sinks. Those issues today though don't seem to be present because we can actually pop that over and the drive's installed. Now you might have noticed to use a screwdriver, but that's just because it's quite fiddly and it would hurt my fingers trying to get it in there to really tighten it up. Wait. I think we should move on. And I think we should move on to the case because the motherboard assembly is pretty much there. There's not really a great deal else we can install here with all of our core components now swiftly on the board itself. So let's tidy the desk away, grab our case for this build, Lian Li's O11D Mini, and crack on with the next stages. I could rabble on to you for ages about this case's features, but the box basically does it for me. 360mm rads at the top, bottom, or both, and a 280mm on the side with a glass sort of fish tank inspired design. It looks great. And small but spacious is actually a really good way of describing this case. The only trade-off you have with the mini version is that you have to pick up an SFX smaller form factor power supply. That isn't a huge problem and you won't pay much more for them, it's just something to bear in mind. And here it is, looking good I might add. The white aesthetic is always a nice touch on a case for me, though a black version is also available. And the addition of USB-C and these nice brushed metal, aluminum accents add to the case very nicely. What we're going to do now is we're going to strip the chassis down, taking off all of the side panels, and basically leaving it a bare frame before laying it on its back to install the motherboard. What we're then able to do is locate the standoffs on the motherboard, and this board actually demonstrates where they are perfectly because they're all massively circled in white with avoid collision text on them. You can see there's 3 at the top, 3 along the middle, and 3 across the bottom. That's all of these holes just here. And we need to make sure we've got enough standoffs in the case to correspond. And that's perhaps where the first problem for this build for a rookie arises. There's 2 standoffs at the top, 2 in the middle, and then a further 2 along the bottom, and these all look to be okay. But where are the extra ones? Well, because this case is a unique form factor, we're only going to screw the 6 in, and the rest of the board will overhang slightly, giving us that cable management room and keeping the form factor nice and small. This board also has a built-in rear I/O shield, which becomes evident when we slide it into the case and slot it through the back. You'll see the I/O pokes out without any need for an external shield to be installed, making things that bit easier. Once the board's in, we can then add 6 screws to those 2 top, middle and bottom locations, and that will keep it into place. And with the motherboard in, we can move on to the CPU cooler. And for this build, I've picked up Corsair's H150i Elite Capellix. There's a few reasons why I've gone for this cooler in particular. First off, it's white, and it fits with the build theme perfectly, fitting into the very top area of our case, or the bottom actually, with the tubes being long enough for either. Installing the cooler can be the most complex process of any build, but I'll guide you through it step by step. First things first, you want to take the cooler out of the box and locate your fans and your radiator. In this build, my plan is to pop the radiator at the top with fans underneath exhausting out, but if there's not quite the clearance with our motherboard and RAM, we could put it at the bottom as an intake. Either way, let's try and get the radiator installed first of all, with the fans and the rad screwed through into the case, and we can deal with the tubes and water block afterwards. My first impressions aren't terrible, but when we pop the fan on the bottom, is it still going to fit? Oh no, I think it's too tight. The problem originally looked like it was going to be the memory, but that's not the problem anymore. The problem is actually our built-in I/O shield. You can see the radiator, I can't push it back far enough in. So I think what this means is that we need to go for a bottom radiator mount. We're going to pop it down the bottom here is my thinking. And from my past experience with this case, we should then be able to run the water block to our CPU over the graphics card. At least that's the plan in theory. It's just figuring out whether we can install the radiator here and reach the CPU, or whether we need to pop it the other way around with the tubes running from this left-hand side. I think that might make more sense and give us a bit more look. My goodness, there are a lot of cables now. Let me show you guys that absolute bunch. But it's in. It's yet to be determined if the GPU is going to fit, but we'll deal with that later. And if it doesn't, we can just remove our top layer of fans. I added an extra set on to make sure we get maximum airflow. And my goodness, it looks ridiculous. Let's now go ahead though and pop the CPU water block onto our CPU itself. Now, as default, you'll just find this, basically a copper base plate with the pump integrated into the top. And you need to dig into your box of your cooler to find the right mounting hardware. The first of those steps is actually taking the included back plate. Now this actually has some sticky stuff on the bottom which will hold it to the back of the motherboard. We can pop the back plate through, then add on these brackets to our cooler, pop these posts onto the motherboard and secure it into place. Don't forget a dab of thermal paste along the way as well to keep things greased up nicely and add that nice thermal bond between your CPU and CPU cooler. Next up on the list is the GPU. Now this right here is an RTX 3080, but not any normal 3080. Oh no, this one right here has 12 gigabytes of GDDR6X memory. That's more memory than the original 3080, making this a more compelling option in 2022, especially as GPU stock starts to return. Here in the UK, you may be spending 15 or 20% over MSRP, but you can pick up all of the latest cards without a problem. And the rumours I'm hearing is that there's more and more stock flooding into the UK sales channel by the day. Hallelujah, at least from a gamer's point of view. The Suprim card is also a massive statement piece when it comes to the latest GPUs. It looks nothing short of fantastic and has an impressive stance when it comes to its design. Plus, with 3 8-pin power connectors, this thing is a bit beefy when it comes to power consumption and will work well with our 12th gen i7. But the question that's on everyone's mind, mine included, is does it actually fit in the PC? I guess now is the moment where we find out. If we slide the GPU kind of over the PCIe slot, push our tubes out the way, I think this is looking tight, but it might just fit. That's tight, that's very tight. Very, very tight indeed. I think it's going to work, but I'll be honest with you, this might take some effort, so give me a minute. This is either one of my best or most stupid ideas yet. I guess we'll have to find out in the temperature testing section. Now, just to alleviate a few concerns off the bat, take a look at our tubes. Now, these might look a bit messy, but don't worry. They're actually completely clear of the GPU. And when the side panel goes on, they'll be stored nice and easily. Airflow-wise, maybe it makes sense to swap this out and have it not be push-pull, but we'll make a decision on that one a bit later. And we are going to pop some fans in the top of the case to exhaust air out the top as well. But we'll do that at the very end. Before that, we need to install the power supply, which in this build is Cooler Master's V850. It's a small form factor, gold rated unit with plenty of wattage for what we're looking to achieve here. The only thing to bear in mind is that the cables it comes with don't actually reach to the motherboard, meaning we will need to pick up some cable extensions, which I'll also link in the description below. I didn't say this build was going to be easy, and I think this so far is a good example of what I mean. It might look a bit silly, but if you wanted to turn things down, you can just take one set of fans off the radiator and have it operate, as I say, not in push-pull. For now though, we're going to install the power supply, then plug up our motherboard, CPU and finally GPU power cables to wrap things up and make sure everything is juiced and ready to go. The power supply just sits behind the motherboard tray at the rear of the case and installs nice and easily. And then finally, to wrap things up, we're going to pop 3 fans on the top of the case to give us a nice bit of exhaust. These cables will need managing with some cable combs too, but we'll get on that as well. This is not going to be a build for everyone, but I think it looks sick. So let's whack those fans on, then boot the system up and check out the performance very shortly. After, of course, a traditional GeekaWhat montage, where we take a look at this beast of a system all powered up. I'll see you in a second, but first, roll that montage. Nice. Now that we've seen how good this system looks when it's all powered up, it's time to take a look at the performance figures. And we've tested a wide variety of titles to see just what this 3080 12GB card can do. On your screen now is a summary of all the results we were able to gather, and you can find full unedited gaming benchmark runs on our dedicated benchmark channel linked in the description below. Let's take a closer look though at some of these titles, starting things off with GTA 5. where we tested at 4K high settings. Here we pulled in 158 frames per second on average, with strong 90 and 99th percentile results that didn't really show a great deal of deviance. The closer our average 90 and 99th numbers are, the better, and the more consistent the frame rates. We also tested out Battlefield 2042 at 1440p high with DLSS enabled and set to performance mode. We pulled in over 100 frames per second on average, 106 to be precise, with 93 and 80 for the 90 and 99th percentile results. The game visually looked great, and it really is the definition of a brand new AAA title, so great to see our fairly expensive system handling it with ease. Next up is COD Vanguard. At 4K high settings, we pulled in 116 frames per second, with once again consistent frame rates. Remember, this is at 4K, so if you wanted to get 130, 140 FPS, tune down to 1440p, and if super high frame rates you jam, 1080 is where you want to sit. Next up on the list is Forza Horizon 5, a game we also tested at 4K. Now in a racing title, all you really need is about 60 frames per second. So for us to get 88 FPS on average with 85 and 80 for the 99th is really nice. This is a much more demanding title than the last gen Forza Horizon 4, so great to see these numbers here. Moving on to Halo Infinite next up, this is another game we tested at 4K high settings and pulled in this time 91 frames per second. As I say, visually the game couldn't really have looked any better. Frame rate was consistent, we didn't see many drop frames or anything like that, and the results were just really nice. A very playable, enjoyable game on this PC. Moving on to Apex Legends next up, we tested here at 4K high settings and brought in 111 frames per second. Apex is just one of those games where you want to be hitting more than 100 FPS to get that competitive advantage, and with support for Nvidia Reflex you can really fine-tune your gaming experience, especially when using Nvidia GPUs. It was a similarly positive story in Fortnite, where we tested at 1080p competitive settings. We know you guys love to play this game at 1080p with everything tuned down to low, but the render distance set to far, and the results will not disappoint. 292 frames per second, oh my goodness, you quite literally couldn't ask for frame rate higher than this, and the game looked, as you'd expect, really great. Finally, to wrap things up, we tested a bit of Call of Duty Warzone at 4K high settings. We managed to bring in 90 FPS on average with 81 and 73 for the 90 and 99th percentiles in a game that looked awesome. And with that just about wraps it up for this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to get subscribed to see more from me. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.